So imagine you have two kids standing right in front of you, and one is just absolutely starving,
Good.
like hasn't eaten a full meal in days, and the other is dangerously dehydrated, just parched to the point of exhaustion.
Oh, wow. Right.
Now, to be perfectly fair, perfectly equal, you hand them both a standard 16-ounce bottle of water.
Well, congratulations. You have achieved 100% perfect equality.
Exactly. You've achieved equality, but, I mean, you have also completely failed both of them.
Yeah, miserably.
And today, for you listening, we are looking at why this ultimate gold standard of fairness in our society, which is equality, is actually breaking our educational system.
It's a really striking scenario, and it gets right to the heart of a massive misunderstanding in how we structure support systems for developing minds.
Right.
We often, conflate treating people exactly the same with treating them fairly. But handing a starving child a bottle of water isn't just unhelpful, it is an administrative failure disguised as a moral victory.
And that is exactly the framework we are going to use today to look at the American classroom in this deep dive.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
It is. If you're a parent or an educator or, just someone paying taxes into a local school district, you hear these terms, equality and equity, constantly.
Got something.
They're in all the mission statements, they dominate the school board meetings, and honestly, they're usually wrapped up in a whole lot of political noise.
Oh, absolutely. So much noise.
But we are setting the politics completely aside today. We are relying on the fieldwork of a 30-year veteran in public education.
Right. The guy we affectionately know as Papa Bear.
Yes, Papa Bear. He brought a really specific, really fascinating piece of research to the forefront for us.
He did. And the research he cites is titled Equality versus Equity in Education. What's the difference and why does it matter?
Which sounds like a textbook, but it's really not.
No, it's not. It was authored by Kern Mahald, who holds a Master of Arts in Cognitive Science in Education. And I think that combination is what makes this exploration so compelling.
The cognitive science part.
Exactly. Because we aren't just looking at, the philosophical debate of what is fair.
Right.
We have 3 decades of boots-on-the-ground administrative experience from Papa Bear intersecting directly with Meinwohl's cognitive science.
So the actual literal mechanics of how a human brain learns.
Yeah, how it learns, how it processes stress, and how acquires new skills within a highly standardized environment like a public school.
Well, before we get into the heavy cognitive science of equity, I actually want to challenge the premise that equality is inherently flawed.
Okay, lay it on me.
Because, from the moment we can literally walk, we are conditioned to believe that equality is the absolute gold standard of justice.
Oh, sure. Fair is fair.
Right. If I have 2 toddlers and 1 chocolate chip cookie, I am breaking that cookie down to the exact millimeter.
But you have to.
I am ensuring neither half has a single microgram more chocolate than the other. Because if I don't, there is going to be an absolute meltdown in my kitchen.
That is a survival tactic, yes.
Exactly. But our entire social contract seems to be built on this idea that equal means fair. So why does a 30-year veteran educator argue that this deeply ingrained societal instinct just fails the moment a student walks into a classroom?
Well, because a classroom is not, it's not a perfectly controlled environment. And the students are definitely not identical variables.
Okay, how so?
Mowald's research defines educational equality very strictly. It means providing all students with the exact same resources and opportunities, totally regardless of their individual differences.
The exact same cookie.
The exact same cookie. But the problem, from a cognitive and a logistical standpoint, is that the inputs, meaning the students themselves, are highly varied.
Right.
The text points to a 2022 report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office, which confirms that the vast majority of children in the United States attend schools with incredibly diverse student bodies.
And we aren't just talking about racial or ethnic diversity here.
No, not at all. We are talking about massive, massive variances in socioeconomic status, foundational knowledge, language proficiency.
Household stability.
Yes, household stability is a huge one. So you have a highly volatile mix of inputs.
Okay.
If you apply a static, perfectly equal resource across a board of highly unequal variables, you mathematically guarantee unequal outcomes.
Wait, guarantee it?
Mathematically. Because equality focuses entirely on equal beginnings.
Giving everyone the exact same starting line.
Right. It assumes that if the school provides the same textbook, the same desk, and the same 45-minute lecture to 30 completely different brains, the institution has done its job.
Dusts off its hands and says, we were fair.
Exactly.
Well,
But cognitive science tells us that an equality-based approach ignores the reality of working memory. It ignores background knowledge and environmental stress.
Okay.
Providing the same resource does not equate to providing the same access to learning.
So it's like a factory assembly line.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you program a machine to stamp out a specific metal part, but you feed it, I don't know, steel, aluminum, copper, and glass, you aren't going to get identical parts at the end of the line. The machine treated everything equally, sure, but the materials demanded completely different pressures, different temperatures.
That is actually a really good analogy.
Right. So if the goal is actually a functional product, or in the case of a school, a student who actually meets the state standards, the machine has to adapt to the material.
And that right there is the core of the paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And that is exactly where we cross the bridge from educational equality over to educational equity.
Okay, let's define that for the listeners. What is the shift?
According to the research, equity requires a fundamental shift in focus. You move away from equal beginnings and you move toward equal outcomes.
Equal outcomes.
Yes. And in the public education system, that outcome is very clearly defined as meeting state-mandated standards and benchmarks.
The finish line.
Right.
The state decides every fourth grader needs to understand fractions, or every single high school sophomore needs to grasp the basic principles of chemistry. That finish line is totally fixed.
The finish line does not move. But the pathway we construct for the student to reach that finish line, that changes drastically under equity.
How so?
Well, Mahaold and Papa Bear assert that because students possess different strengths, different weaknesses, and totally different circumstances, resources must be distributed differentially.
Differentially?
Yes. In a truly equitable system, every single student gets exactly what they need, precisely when they need it, to ensure that their academic outcomes do not correlate with factors like race, socioeconomic status, or disability.
Okay, I want to stop on that word you just used, differentially.
Sure.
Because, I mean, that literally means unequally.
It does.
And this is where I think a lot of people instinctively, they push back hard.
Oh, they push back very hard.
Because if a school principal buys a massive crate of size 7 shoes and gives one to every single student on the first day of school, that is perfect equality.
Right, everyone got the same shoe.
But obviously, the kids with size 5 feet are going to be tripping during gym class.
Yeah, constantly.
And the kids with size 9 feet are going to be in actual agony. But a handful of kids happen to be a size 7 and they run the race just fine.
Exactly.
So if we apply an equity model, the principal takes the time to measure every foot and buys the corresponding shoe. But, and here's the pushback, doesn't that inherently open the door to accusations of favoritism?
I mean, it certainly can feel that way to some people.
Because if I see one kid getting a custom-fitted size 9 and another getting a standard size 7, the optics just scream unfairness to a society that's conditioned for equality.
It totally triggers that societal instinct, absolutely. But let's look at the actual goal of the school.
Okay.
Is the goal of the physical education department to distribute identical footwear, or is the goal to teach cardiovascular fitness?
It's fitness.
Right. So if we force the size 9 student to run in the size 7 shoe and they fail the fitness test, an equality-based system blames the student.
It says, oh, you're just a bad runner.
Exactly. It concludes the student just didn't try hard enough. But an equity-based system recognizes that the standard resource created an artificial barrier.
The shoe was the barrier, not their lungs.
Yes. Giving that student the size 9 shoe isn't favoritism. It is the removal of a barrier that the size 7 student never even faced in the first place.
Wow. Okay. So the resource changes, but the standard remains rigorous.
Always.
Everyone still has to run the mile in under 10 minutes. You just aren't forcing half the class to do it with crushed toes.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that the research points out this concept isn't actually foreign to our schools.
It isn't.
No. It is just siloed. We already do this extensively in special education.
Oh, wait. How so? Explain that.
Well, in special education, the law literally mandates accommodations and modifications.
Okay.
If a student has a diagnosed processing disorder or, say, dyslexia, the school doesn't just hand them the standard reading material and say, good luck.
Yeah.
That's equality.
Right. That would be cruel.
Exactly. The school alters the delivery of the resource. They might provide an audio version of the text, or they allow extra time for the cognitive processing to actually occur.
Okay, I see.
So what Papa Bear is arguing for, and what's supported by cognitive science, is that we need to view every student through this exact lens.
Every single student?
Yes, every student has a unique set of circumstances that acts as either a tailwind or a headwind. Equity is basically applying the philosophy of accommodations broadly without requiring a special education label to justify it.
Man, that makes me think of that visual metaphor that is, like, inevitably brought up in these
Oh,
discussions.
I know the one you're talking about.
We've all seen that viral graphic on social media, right? The three kids of varying heights trying to watch a baseball game over a solid wooden fence.
Yep, the boxes.
Right. The tallest kid can see over it fine, the middle kid can't quite see, and the shortest kid is just staring at solid wood.
Oh.
So in the equality panel of the comic, they all get one equal-sized box to stand on. The tall kid is now towering way over the fence, the middle kid can just barely see, and the shortest kid is still staring at the wood.
Because equality failed the shortest kid.
Exactly. But in the equity panel, the tall kid gets no box, the middle kid gets one, and the short kid gets two boxes. Now they can all see the game.
It's a very neat little graphic.
It is. It's a neat little graphic, but I mean, I've always found it a bit reductive. It feels way too clean for how messy an actual school district is.
Oh, wait, it's entirely reductive. It serves as a necessary baseline just to understand the basic redistribution of resources, but it has flaws.
Right.
However, to your point, the graphic completely misses the psychological and logistical realities of an actual classroom.
Yes. What does it miss?
Well, what that cartoon doesn't show you is the administrative friction of moving those boxes around.
Right. The paperwork.
And it doesn't show you the psychological toll on the shortest child who has to, publicly stand on two boxes, potentially feeling stigmatized, just to achieve baseline access.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Kids notice that stuff.
They absolutely do. And frankly, it doesn't show you the tall person's parents complaining at a school board meeting that their child's box was taken away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is the huge one. Because to the tall person, losing their box feels like a penalty.
It feels like theft to them.
Right. Even if they never needed the box to see the baseball game in the first place, the sheer act of losing a resource they felt entitled to under the rules of equality, well, it breeds resentment.
It really does.
So how does a school navigate that real-world friction? Let's take this out of the realm of cartoons and metaphors.
Okay.
Papa Bear provides a very real, incredibly common scenario in his research about this, the digital divide, specifically regarding school-issued technology.
Oh, this is a perfect case study of how well-intentioned equality actually causes measurable harm. Let's look at the scenario.
Laid out for us.
Okay, a school district decides to prioritize digital literacy. They want every student to be proficient in online research.
Great goal.
Excellent goal. So utilizing an equality framework, they purchase laptops, and they issue the exact same piece of hardware to every single student to take home.
And on paper, for the district, that is a massive victory. They leveled the playing field. Literally everyone gets a laptop.
Perfect equality.
Yeah.
But then the teacher assigns a project, requiring the student to research historical sources on the internet at home.
Okay, here we go.
For the student who lives in a household with, high-speed, reliable Wi-Fi, this is an engaging, pretty straightforward assignment.
Right.
Their cognitive load is entirely dedicated to the academic task, which is synthesizing history.
But the laptop is effectively a very expensive paperweight if you live in a rural area without broadband.
Exactly.
Or if your family's financial situation just means the monthly internet bill didn't get paid this month.
And this is where the cognitive science of equity comes into play. For the student without internet access, what actually happens to their cognitive load?
They aren't thinking about history at all.
No, they are thinking about logistics. They are stressing over how to get to a public library before it closes.
Oh, man.
Or they're figuring out how to tether to a parent's prepaid cell phone data plan, hoping they don't run out of data. Or, honestly, they're just internalizing the intense anxiety of impending failure.
So the equal resource, the laptop, has not only failed to help them, it has actively widened the opportunity gap.
It has. By introducing a completely new, insurmountable barrier that their wealthier peers do not face.
Wow.
And they will be graded and penalized for an assignment they literally cannot complete.
So what does the teacher do? Let's walk through the actual classroom management of this. If the teacher operates under equality, they give the kid a 0 for not doing the research.
Right. Because everyone had a week to do it.
But if they operate under equity, what is the protocol?
Well, Papa Bear suggests the teacher has to identify the students without Wi-Fi and proactively provide hard copies of the research material.
Printed out articles.
Yes.
Okay, but I have to push back here. On behalf of the equality mindset, isn't the teacher just enabling them?
How do you mean?
By printing out stacks of paper, literally finding the websites for them and handing them a tidy little packet, aren't we lowering the bar? I mean, the other kids had to go find the websites themselves.
That is a very, very common objection. But it misunderstands what is actually being measured by the teacher.
Okay, what's being measured?
What is the state standard in this scenario? Is the standard the student must know how to type a URL into a browser? Or is the standard the student must be able to synthesize primary historical documents?
Oh, it's the synthesis. It's the critical thinking about the history.
Correct. The teacher is isolating the academic variable.
Isolating the variable.
Yes. By providing the hard copies, the teacher is removing the logistical barrier, the lack of Wi-Fi, so that the student's brain can actually engage with the historical synthesis.
I see.
The rigor of the history assignment hasn't changed one bit. The student still has to read, analyze, and write the report to the exact same standard as their peers.
So providing the printed packet is basically the equivalent of handing out the second box in the baseball graphic.
Exactly. It is extra work for the educator, yes. It is inherently unequal treatment, absolutely. But it is the only way to achieve an equitable opportunity for that student's brain to interact with the material.
That really clarifies the distinction between lowering the standard and just clearing the path to the standard.
Right. You clear the path, you keep the standard high.
But, the laptop issue is just one piece of hardware. Like, I feel like the real friction happens when you look at the entire environment the student takes that hardware into.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because the school bell rings at 3:00 p.m., and we have this illusion that all the kids vanish into this uniform, vaguely pleasant after-school existence.
Right. A very 1950s sitcom idea of what happens after school.
Exactly. And the assumption of a standardized home environment is, I think, one of the most dangerous pitfalls of the equality mindset.
The research actually outlines a highly illustrative comparison to explore this exact thing. It's a tale of two junior high students. Let's call them Student A and Student B.
Okay, for you listening, put yourself in the shoes of a junior high math teacher. Student A and Student B sit in the exact same classroom, they listen to the exact same lecture, and they have access to the exact same school resources from 8:00 a.m. to 3:00 p.m.
In your classroom, they experience absolute equality.
Right. But then the bell rings. Student B goes home, eats a nutritious snack, rests for an hour, and then sits down in a quiet room where a paid private tutor helps them work through the day's algebra homework.
A low-stress, highly supported environment that frees up the prefrontal cortex to focus entirely on mathematical problem solving.
Must be nice.
It is. Now, contrast that with Student A. The bell rings, and Student A immediately goes to a part-time job to help their family pay rent.
A junior high student.
Yes, or working under the table, or just doing whatever they can. They work until 7:00 p.m. They come home, and because their parents are working late shifts, Student A is now responsible for feeding and putting their two younger siblings to bed.
Okay.
By the time they finally sit down and open their algebra book, it is 10:00 p.m.
So, as the teacher, if you enforce a strict equality policy, you assign them both 20 algebra equations, and you demand they both turn it in the next morning at 8 a.m.
Right.
And if I am the teacher, I might justify that by saying, well, I have to prepare them for the real world. A boss isn't going to care if they had to babysit. Deadlines are deadlines.
That is the classic argument.
If I give student A an extension, aren't I fundamentally failing to teach them time management?
Well, that argument hinges on the belief that a junior high math class is a simulation of a corporate workplace, rather than a developmental environment designed to build neurological pathways.
Wow, okay. That's a huge distinction.
It is. And the cognitive science fundamentally rejects the real-world boss justification for children. When Student A opens that math book at 10:00 p.m., their brain is quite literally bathed in cortisol from the stress of managing adult responsibilities all evening.
The stress hormones.
Yes, they are sleep-deprived, which severely inhibits working memory and executive function. If you enforce the strict morning deadline and Student A fails, what data have you actually gathered as a teacher?
I mean, you haven't measured their ability to do algebra at all. You've measured their socioeconomic bandwidth.
Exactly. You are penalizing them for their poverty, not their intellect.
That is heavy.
It is. An equitable approach recognizes that the purpose of homework is to practice the skill, not to enforce compliance to an arbitrary timeline.
So what are the expert solutions outlined in the research? How do you fix that for Student A?
The solutions focus heavily on institutional flexibility. For instance, the teacher might structure the assignments so that an entire week's worth of homework is due on Friday afternoon, rather than requiring daily submissions every morning.
Let's analyze how that actually changes the cognitive landscape for Student A. Because it sounds simple, just move the due date.
It's massive, though. By moving the deadline to Friday, The teacher gives student A autonomy over their chaotic schedule.
Ah.
If Monday and Tuesday are totally consumed by work and childcare, student A doesn't accumulate irreversible zeros.
Mm.
They can utilize a day off on Wednesday or Thursday to sit down when they're relatively rested and actually engage with the algebra.
So the rigor remains intact. They still have to successfully complete the 20 equation.
Absolutely. The rigor is identical to student B, but the system has flexed to accommodate the reality of their environment.
And the research doesn't stop at just deadlines, does it? It gets much more granular regarding physiological needs.
It does.
Because, I mean, student B had that healthy snack, right?
Yeah.
And student A might be trying to solve quadratic equations on a completely empty stomach.
And this is where education policy must intersect with public health. Mahawald's research points out that school districts really must partner with local food banks to provide supplemental meals and snacks.
Why is that an educational imperative, though?
Because from a cognitive science perspective, attempting to teach a hungry child is a biological impossibility.
Seriously, a biological impossibility.
Yes, the brain consumes an enormous amount of glucose to perform complex tasks, like algebra or reading comprehension. If a student is experiencing food insecurity, their brain literally shifts into a survival state.
It's just trying to keep the body running.
Exactly. It prioritizes basic physiological functioning over abstract reasoning. Providing that food is not just some nice act of charity, it's an educational prerequisite.
Wow.
It is an equitable intervention required to bring that student's brain to a baseline state where learning can actually occur.
Okay, so we're talking about shifting due dates, providing hard copies of internet research, and literally ensuring the student's caloric needs are met.
Right.
These are massive, targeted interventions. But Papa Bear makes a sobering observation here in his notes, doesn't he?
He does.
He notes that if a district waits until junior high to start applying these equity lenses to student A, they are already playing a massive game of catch-up that they might not actually win.
The timeline of cognitive development is incredibly unforgiving. If we only focus on equity when students are old enough to articulate their struggles, we have ignored the most critical window of brain development.
So where's the actual starting line of these opportunity gaps? If it's not junior high, when is it?
According to the text, these gaps are fully formed before the student ever sets foot in a kindergarten classroom.
Before kindergarten.
Yes. We are talking about children from low-income families entering the public school system already lagging significantly behind their higher-income peers.
The research presents a stark reality regarding early childhood development. Right.
It really does. By age 5, when formal schooling typically begins, there are already massive, measurable disparities in language acquisition, early numeracy skills, and social-emotional development.
Okay, I have to interrupt here because this is where the debate gets really, really contentious in the public sphere.
Go for it.
If a 5-year-old from a low-income neighborhood arrives at kindergarten drastically behind a 5-year-old from a wealthy suburb, whose fault is that?
That's the million-dollar question for a lot of people.
Right. And more importantly, is it actually the public school system's responsibility to fix a gap that was created before the child was even in their care?
Right.
If the school applies strict equality on day 1 of kindergarten, equal books, equal teacher time, shouldn't that be enough?
Applying equality on day 1 of kindergarten to a child who is already, say, 3 years behind developmentally is a guaranteed perpetual failure.
A guarantee.
Yes. The cognitive science is very clear on why these gaps form, and I want to stress this. It has absolutely nothing to do with inherent potential or intelligence.
Okay, then what is it?
The first 5 years of life are a period of explosive neuroplasticity. The brain is rapidly forming synapses based on environmental exposure. And the research notes that children in higher-income families generally have access to high-quality preschool environments.
Environments that cost thousands of dollars a month.
Thousands, which low-income families simply cannot afford. And those expensive environments provide rich, continuous vocabulary exposure.
They're constantly being talked to.
Yes, they engage in guided play that builds spatial reasoning and early math concepts. They have trained professionals guiding their emotional regulation when they get upset. The wealthy child's brain is being meticulously wired for the exact tasks they will face in kindergarten.
Okay. And the lower income child?
Conversely, a child in a low-income environment may experience more environmental stress. They have less access to structured educational play and, crucially, fewer diverse vocabulary interactions.
Right. This connects to concepts like the 30 million word gap, right?
Exactly.
Even if the exact number of 30 million is debated by modern linguists, the underlying premise totally holds up. The sheer volume and complexity of language a child is exposed to directly builds the neural architecture for reading comprehension later on.
Precisely. The architectural foundation is fundamentally different on day one. So if the kindergarten teacher stands at the front of the room and treats everyone equally,
Speaking at the same pace.
right, speaking at the same pace, using the exact same vocabulary, assuming everyone just knows how to hold a pencil or sit cross-legged for 20 minutes without hitting their neighbor.
They're cementing the inequity.
Exactly, they are cementing it. The equitable solution, according to the research, requires education leaders to apply an equity lens to pre-K and early intervention.
Meaning what, exactly?
Investing in high-quality, accessible early childhood education. It is the only systemic way to prevent these opportunity gaps from calcifying before age 5.
The text also heavily emphasizes family engagement before the child even reaches kindergarten, which, that makes sense. If the school waits until the first parent-teacher conference in November of kindergarten to realize the child has severe developmental delays,
You've lost crucial months of neuroplasticity.
right, months you can't get back.
Exactly. So knowing all of this, understanding the biological urgency of early intervention, the cognitive load of the digital divide, and the physiological impact of the invisible backpack that student A carries.
The question becomes totally operational.
Yes, how does a district actually do this?
Right. Because it's one thing for us to sit here and philosophize about neuroplasticity and the failures of equality. It's an entirely different beast for a superintendent to turn a massive, slow-moving school district into an equity-driven machine.
It's like turning an aircraft carrier.
It really is. Thankfully, Papa Bear's research provides a tangible roadmap. It breaks down 3 specific best practices for educators to create these equitable environments.
Let's dig into them.
Let's start with the first one. Equitable family engagement.
Okay, so it sounds like a buzzword, I know, but the distinction between standard engagement and equitable engagement is actually profound.
How so?
Well, a standard equality-based approach to family engagement is, the traditional open house.
Oh, sure. The school will be open on Thursday from 5:00 p.m. to 7:00 p.m.
Exactly. Every parent has an equal opportunity to come speak with the teacher.
But student A's parents, the ones from our junior high example, are working the late shift.
Right.
They are physically incapable of being in the gymnasium on Thursday at 5:00 p.m. So the equality model subtly shifts the blame to the parents, implying they just don't care enough to show up.
Exactly. It creates a false narrative of parental apathy. But equitable family engagement flips the script. It requires the institution to actually shoulder the burden of connection.
The school has to do the work.
Yes. The educator must proactively open communication channels that accommodate the family's reality.
What does that look like practically?
This might mean the teacher schedules a phone call during the parent's lunch break on a Tuesday. Or they utilize two-way translated text messaging apps if there's a language barrier. Or they even meet at a local community center instead of the school.
And the reason this is the very first step on the roadmap is because of the data it provides, right?
Totally.
Because if the teacher never builds that bridge to student A's parents, the teacher never learns about the part-time job. They never learn about the babysitting.
And without that relational data, the teacher is flying blind. You cannot build the right size box if you don't know how tall the student is.
That makes total sense. The open communication channel provides the necessary context for the teacher to apply those targeted interventions.
Like the flexible homework deadlines.
Exactly. The things that actually relieve the student's cognitive load.
Right.
Well, that perfectly transitions into the second best practice on the roadmap, which kind of zooms out from the individual classroom to the administrative level.
Okay, what is it?
Equitable education policies. The text says that leaders must forecast the impact of new policies on traditionally underserved groups.
This is where the theoretical rubber really meets the administrative road. The research specifically identifies groups that must be centered in this forecasting. Students of color, multilingual learners, low-income students, and students with disabilities.
So when a school board writes a policy, they cannot operate under the delusion of the quote-unquote average student.
Exactly. There is no average student. Let's play this out with a scenario to make it concrete.
Okay.
Say a school board decides to implement a strict zero tolerance for tardiness policy. If you are not in your seat by the 8:00 a.m. bell, you receive an immediate detention.
Okay, and the rationale for the board is equality, right?
Right.
The rule applies to everyone, it prepares them for the real world, and it maximizes instructional time.
On the surface, it looks like a perfect equality policy. But if the board applies the equitable forecasting practice, the consequences can be dire. Students They have to analyze who is actually being impacted by this. Let's look at the transportation logistics. High-income students might be driven in personal vehicles by parents who work flexible white-collar jobs. Their arrival time is largely within their control.
But a low-income student might be relying on an underfunded, incredibly unreliable city bus system.
Yes.
Or, like our student A, they might be responsible for walking 3 younger siblings to a totally different elementary school across town before they can even head to the high school.
So when the 8 a.m. bell rings, the wealthy student is seated, and the low-income student is walking in 5 minutes late because the city bus broke down.
And the equality policy dictates the low-income student gets a detention.
Yes. The board has essentially criminalized a logistical reality that the student has absolutely zero control over.
And what does that do to the student's engagement?
It destroys it.
Right. Because if I get a detention because the bus broke down, I immediately realize the system is rigged against me. I disengage.
Exactly. The policy actively harms the exact marginalized groups it claimed to treat equally.
That is why equitable policymaking requires forecasting those impacts before the policy is voted on, not retroactively apologizing for the disparate outcomes.
Right. It forces administrators to ask a very uncomfortable question. Does this rule measure the student's character, or does it merely measure their circumstances?
Man, it requires a level of empathy and logistical foresight that is honestly staggering.
It's hard work.
But it's the third practice on this roadmap that I think is the most challenging and honestly the one that will face the most pushback from the public.
Okay, let's hear it.
The text calls it equitable goal setting for academic performance.
Yes. This is where the cognitive science is most rigorously applied.
So the research states that educators should set specific goals to reduce disparities in performance, and it gives a very concrete, very wild example.
It does.
It suggests setting a goal that multilingual learner students who are actively learning English will perform as well or better on standardized math tests than monolingual native English speakers.
Right.
Now, I have to represent the skeptic here.
Please do.
If a student does not speak the language the test is written in, how can you possibly expect them to match or beat a native speaker? Doesn't that border on toxic positivity?
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. Aren't you just setting the student and the teacher up for a massive demoralizing failure?
If you are constrained by an equality mindset, then yes, it is mathematically impossible.
Okay, break that down.
If the teacher delivers the math lecture in rapid-fire English, hands out a word problem worksheet written in complex English, and offers no other support, the multilingual learner will fail.
Obviously.
But they don't fail because they don't understand the math. They fail because their cognitive load is entirely consumed by the task of translation.
They are essentially taking a language test, not a math test.
Precisely. You have fundamentally failed to isolate the variable you are supposed to be measuring.
Which is math.
Which is math. And this is where the expert solution, termed differentiated instruction, comes in. Equity demands that we remove the linguistic barrier so the student can demonstrate their mathematical reasoning.
Okay, but what does differentiated instruction actually look like in that scenario? How do you remove the barrier without lowering the mathematical standard?
It requires the teacher to customize the delivery mechanism.
Give me an example.
So, for the multilingual learner, the teacher might provide the math problems with heavy visual aids and diagrams. They might provide a glossary of mathematical terms in the student's native language.
Right, that makes sense.
Or they might allow the student to demonstrate their understanding of a geometric concept by building a physical model or explaining it verbally, rather than writing a paragraph in English.
So you are basically building a custom scaffold for their brain to reach the math concept.
Yes, you are reducing the extraneous cognitive load, the struggle to translate vocabulary, so that all of their working memory can be applied to the intrinsic cognitive load of the math itself.
And if you do that,
If you provide the right linguistic support, their brain is absolutely as capable of grasping the calculus or the algebra as the native English speaker's brain.
you customize the path, but you maintain the exact same rigor at the finish line.
Exactly.
I mean, that fundamentally redefines what it means to be a teacher.
It really does.
It shifts the role from a broadcaster of information, just standing at the front of the room, to a clinical diagnostician.
A cognitive diagnostician, yeah.
The teacher has to constantly ask, what specific barrier is blocking this specific brain, and what exact tool do I need to engineer to bypass it?
Yes.
It's incredible, but it also sounds exhausting. It requires systemic support, smaller class sizes, and administration that gives teachers the time to actually do this level of targeted mentorship.
It is an immense undertaking.
Yeah.
It is far more difficult than stamping out identical parts on an assembly line.
Hmm.
But as research shows, it is the only viable path to actually achieving the mandate of public education.
Let's zoom out and just synthesize this entirely.
Good idea.
We started by tearing down the illusion that giving everyone the same water bottle is fair. We established that educational equality equal beginnings ignores the massive variance in student backgrounds, socioeconomic realities, and cognitive development.
Right. We examined the paradigm shift toward equity, which demands equal outcomes. We saw how giving everyone a laptop without considering their Wi-Fi access creates a digital divide.
And how a student's invisible backpack of after-school responsibilities totally dictates their cognitive capacity the next morning.
Exactly.
We looked at the biology of it, how those opportunity gaps are heavily wired into the brain during the first 5 years of life due to environmental factors, making early intervention super critical.
And we walked through Papa Bear's roadmap, shifting to equitable family engagement, forecasting the harm of standardized policies, and utilizing differentiated instruction to isolate academic variables and hold every student to a high, rigorous standard.
It is a profound rethinking of institutional responsibility. It basically asks the system to bend rather than asking the vulnerable student to break.
Beautifully said.
And this matters profoundly to you, the listener, regardless of whether you actually have a child in the system right now. The students sitting in these classrooms are the future workforce, they're the future voters, the future innovators.
Absolutely.
When a school district operates on strict equality, they are essentially discarding the massive potential of any student who doesn't perfectly fit the standard mold. But when they operate on equity, they are cultivating a far more capable, resilient, and thriving society.
The macro-level benefits of an equitable education system are totally undeniable. But to wrap up our analysis, I actually want to leave you with a final thought experiment.
Okay.
One that extends beyond the scope of Mahawald and Papa Bear's research, but is a direct consequence of it.
I'm ready. Let's hear it.
So we have spent this entire time outlining the architecture of a perfectly equitable school system.
Right.
A system where the institution constantly flexes to accommodate the individual, where deadlines are fluid based on home life, where linguistic barriers are meticulously dismantled by empathetic teachers, and where a student's unique circumstances are always factored into their evaluation.
A highly supportive, highly customized developmental incubator.
Yes. But what happens to that student on the day after graduation? When an 18-year-old leaves that perfectly equitable incubator and enters a corporate workforce or a legal system or a housing market that largely still operates on cold, hard, unyielding inequality.
Or worse, operates on neither.
Exactly. Or neither.
That is a very jarring transition.
It is. If a student's brain spends its entire developmental phase in a system that assumes the burden of accommodation, how do they navigate a boss who demands strict equality in deliverables regardless of the employee's personal struggles?
Yeah, the boss isn't extending the deadline because you had a hard night.
No. So by engineering these perfectly equitable schools, are we preparing students to thrive in the world as it should be, while simultaneously leaving them highly vulnerable to the harsh, inflexible realities of the world as it actually is?
Wow, that is a staggering question to walk away with. Does the school's job end at academic proficiency, or does it include hardening the student for an inequitable world?
It is a complex friction point between cognitive development and societal reality.
It really is. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We will see you next time.